If we refuse this bill, who knows what the consequences will be?
Coming up, the Alaska Federation of Natives, born 50 years ago in a battle for land and civil rights.
It's kind of a miracle that we got a settlement.
40 million acre land deal that forever changed the lives of Alaska Natives.
The story of AFN is giving people a voice.
The story of not being victims, the story of being survivors.
Ahead, the story of AFN and the next chapter.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to our program as we explore a chapter in Alaska history that continues to unfold today. Next week, the Alaska Federation of Natives will hold its 50th annual convention in Fairbanks. Today, AFN is the dominant political, economic, and cultural voice for Alaska Natives. But back in the early days, it was a very different story. Native corporations and their impressive office buildings, they loom large in the state's economic landscape. Yet most Alaskans have no idea how these corporations came to be, how they owe their existence to AFN's grassroots fight for land. At the museum, you can find a tribute to AFN's humble beginnings.
Oh my God, that is a copy of my paper.
A copy of a graduate research paper Willie Hensley wrote for Justice J. Rabinowitz. Hensley still has the original.
And it has the A that he gave me for the paper.
A paper that laid out AFN's legal case that Alaska Natives were entitled to land taken away at statehood.
Those are like founding documents here.
You can also find Emil Noddy's report on AFN's first meeting. He was president.
Editorials opposed us, mining groups opposed us, individuals wrote letters against us.
People thought we were militants or radicals.
Maybe not radicals, but young guns ready to do what they felt needed to be done.
This was an actual crisis point. This is 7 years after statehood. The machine was in motion, that is the land selection machine.
Lands for thousands of years held in common by people who depended on food from the wild to survive.
We were never going to get that land back, ever. And so it was pretty darn clear to us that we had to stop the state selections.
Our first reaction, of course, was to basically state that we owned all of Alaska. We wanted it back. We wanted to be paid for the land that was already taken. Naturally, this was impossible.
But the forces of history worked in AFN's favor. In the backdrop of the land claims fight,
there were marches through the streets of towns and cities.
A national civil rights and anti-poverty movement which gave Alaska Natives momentum. A sympathetic president, Richard Nixon, never forgot his college football coach, a Native American who helped him understand the injustices to his people. And then the push for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. To build it, oil companies wanted land claims settled. And probably one of the most important factors, a newfound unity.
We wrote letters across the state to people we didn't know, people whose names we just heard.
People brought together under the umbrella of AFN. Even then, as a young man, Emil Noddy recognized the potential.
And to think what's happened here, the friendships we've made and the people we've come to know from coming together, I think is one of the great happenings.
It's kind of a miracle that we got a settlement. We had no money and no organization.
And no communication system.
There are no phones to the villages.
Ladies and gentlemen of the AFN, this is the White House in Washington calling. I present the President of the United States.
The year 1971, President Richard Nixon addresses AFN in this recorded message.
I want you to be among the first to know that I have just signed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. This is a milestone in Alaska's history, and in the way our government deals with Native and Indian peoples.
The deal, 44 million acres of land and nearly $1 billion. The legacy of AFN, a story that's far from over. Up next, the deal was closed, but AFN's work is far from over. Megan Alvana Stimfel, who will deliver the keynote speech at AFN next week with Emil Nadi, joins us to talk about AFN's unfinished business. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act is still a work in progress, which means the same holds true for the Alaska Federation of Natives.
A total of 511 yes and 56 no.
The vote is complete.
But AFN's work had just begun.
Colonial powers are always trying to rewire your identity, you know, because what they want is control.
When it seems that everywhere we turn, there is some new challenge.
In their new role as corporate shareholders, many Alaska Natives experienced an identity crisis.
Somebody said, it's time that we put away the beads and the feathers. But I say, it's time for us, maybe, to put away the suit jackets and the ties.
Will Mayo gave AFN's keynote speech in 1993, and people still talk about it today. He traded in his suit and tie for traditional clothes.
Maybe I'll find some beads. And look here, moose skin.
Mayo told the gathering he wanted to honor ancestors of all Alaska Natives because they loved who they were and what they did.
So I'm going to honor them.
In many ways, a suit is a sign of oppression. A suit is a sign of power. It separates people.
Alaska's Lieutenant Governor Byron Malott, Willie Hensley, Roy Hundorf, early leaders of AFN on a panel for a group of young natives in an executive training program to help them balance the best of both worlds.
I think I'm one of the few who's in my generation that living today that lived in sod homes.
What does that picture say to you?
It's a very powerful image to me.
3 leaders sitting underneath a photograph of them taken when they were young.
The pressure on them is probably unimaginable. They were our voices, and they had to make decisions without knowing the repercussions of them.
1, 2, 3.
I think the story of AFN is the story of not being victims, the story of being survivors.
Native corporations are survivors too. Today, they have businesses all over the world and pay dividends to shareholders, who in turn pump them into Alaska's economy.
First of all, anything institution that survives 50 years, that's something to be proud of.
John Shively is known for his work on the Pebble Mine project, but once was a VISTA volunteer who attended the first AFN, the start of it all.
People were legitimately poor. I mean, Western Alaska was legitimately a third world country.
Shively says although poverty persists in rural Alaska today, AFN and the native corporations it fostered have made Alaska a better place and offer hope.
In this country, there is no other group of minority people that sit at the business roundtable in any state as equals the way the people that run the native corporations do. So it's totally unique.
The truth is, we probably have done as much for non-native Alaska as we have done for ourselves, because we got them all employed, helping us make a success of this thing that we've created.
We're in the midst of a major transition.
AFN sprang from the passions of the younger generation.
I was a scholarship recipient of our nonprofit.
Passions it continues to feed today.
I'm proud to be where I'm at today.
Here at APU, another generation of Native leaders prepares to pass the torch. Then and now, young people have an important role to play at AFN through the Elders and Youth Conference. And joining us now to talk about the legacy of AFN, Megan Alvana Stimfel, who is an alumnus of the Elders and Youth Conference and also will deliver the keynote speech along with Emil Nadi. What's it going to be like to share the stage with Emil Nadi?
It's a tremendous honor, and I feel the weight of responsibility that I'm able to articulate the justice that our Native community deserves.
So being a young person on the stage with one of the elders of the movement, why do you think that AFN does that, try to combine both age groups in one's speech?
Because the values that we live by are transferred from our elders to our youth, and they're carried on through generations.
So what does AFN mean to you? What is the story of AFN?
The story of AFN to me means the power of people when they organize and they have a purpose and they know what they want.
And we just saw Will Mayo giving a speech. You were about 10 years old. Growing up in this environment of AFN, what has that been like for you? How has that shaped you?
For me, it's always provided a sense of pride and identity in celebrating who I am rather than not.
So AFN has unfinished business. Your generation is the torchbearer. What do you think your generation should do?
The responsibility of my generation is to resolve the issue of corporations and tribes. I serve as the chief of my tribe, yet I have no formal tie to the island that I represent because I'm not
King Island.
It's King Island. I'm not a shareholder in the King Island Native Corporation. So it's incumbent upon our community to resolve that, and we must have the courage to do.
That's right, because the shares were given to people and they weren't necessarily given to the next generation, although some corporations have set aside shares. Do you think that's a major issue? It's called the afterborn issue.
Yes, I was an afterborn for most of my life until my mother gave me some shares. But when I talk to my cousins and my family, frankly, they feel unimportant. And there are hunters who use the island. So we must resolve this, and it's a local issue that we'll do as a community.
So out of all the issues out there, what are you the most passionate about?
I'm the most passionate about overcoming the real human need that exists in our state. We must address this paradox of prosperity and poverty. We have 30 communities that still have no running water and sewer. That will require a $1.4 billion investment. The collective wealth of our institutions, we must define how we're going to do that.
Sort of get the best of both worlds.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you, Megan Alvana Stimfel. Well, still ahead, two longtime Native journalists, Nellie Moore and Jocelyn Estes, plus the push to get ready for the convention.
To me, it's a time of pride.
Bead by bead, thread by thread, what traditional talents bring to the tapestry of AFN. From tribal to corporate, from rural to urban, the Alaska Federation of Natives has had a lot of groups in one big tent. That continues to be both a challenge and an opportunity for AFN. And joining us to share their insights on how AFN has evolved, we have Nellie Moore and Jocelyn Estes, two veteran journalists who have covered AFN a lot over the years. Jocelyn, I want to start with you because people have this impression that it all got started when AFN was born. But can you talk about the historical buildup to AFN?
Well, as soon as Alaska was transferred from Russia to America and people started flowing in, Natives were protesting the taking of their lands. I know in the 1880s, Tanana Chiefs Conference met in Fairbanks, and then in the 1920s, the Alaska Native Brotherhood fought for the right to vote, school desegregation, and the extension of federal and territorial benefits to Alaska Natives. And all that laid the foundation for what AFN did later.
So what was it about AFN that it took all of these movements and sort of gave them a boost?
Well, for one thing, up until then, statehood, they were pretty isolated, and people didn't really know everything that was going on. I think you heard Willie Hensley mention, you know, we didn't even have phones. I mean, we were used maybe 2 long-distance lines out of Kotzebue and probably a crank phone. So communication back there was very difficult, and the AFN, its work with the Tundra Times newspaper, really brought everybody together to work on this issue, I think. And
that's where we got all those photographs, was from the archives of the Tundra Times. So are you guys amazed at how AFN has evolved, how big it's grown? Like, it started out with a few hundred people.
Well, to tell you the truth, when I was younger, it seemed really big to me then. And it has grown, but the rooms that they meet in have also gotten bigger. And I think the biggest change is the money that went to the Native corporations as a result of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And that's what brought more people in, is people had money to come to.
Well, it's an amazing timeline of events. What is it that stands out to you in the AFN story, Nellie?
Oh, there's been a tremendous amount of change for Alaska Natives, as Willie was saying again, that he lived in a sod hut. Now the nonprofit Native corporations deal with housing, homelessness in Anchorage, the issue of water and sewer, and just a tremendous amount of change. Although there are still things they have to work on, right now we're talking about better internet, better, I mean, hospitals. There are hospitals in the bush. So things,
a lot of big things to work on. You know, we saw Will Mayo, one of those great moments at AFN. Do you have moments that stand out to you in your years of being at AFN?
I remember Roger Lang, a Tsimshian Indian from southeast Alaska, and in the 60s and 70s, if you wanted to go to high school, you basically had to go to a boarding school in most of rural Alaska. And then Natives won a court case that required the state to build schools and villages. And when kids left home, there was the burden of culture shock on them. And Roger Lang said, now we're shipping teachers to rural Alaska, and that burden of culture shock has fallen on them. And he talked about the turnover and how we need to address that. So for some reason, I remember that.
Well, I guess it was sort of a milestone that things went the other way, the need to spread culture. Nellie, for you?
I think it's just the things that have happened at AFN, the many, many things that tie in with Alaska's history. Ted Stevens and his speeches to the AFN, some of the speeches that the Native leaders made, like Will Mayo, and just the...
What about in your region? Was there a speech you remember from one of your leaders?
Well, I was really shocked that it was a AFN that was held in Fairbanks, but John Schaefer, who is a prominent Native leader and also was Adjutant General, and he stood up at AFN making a speech and addressed the issue of alcoholism and said that he was an alcoholic, and that just floored me, that he had the courage to stand up there and talk about that, which had been and is still a major issue for Alaska Natives. So that really got to me.
A lot of powerful and important conversations over the years, yet some people still say that AFN, you know, kind of fell short of the mark, that there is still a lot that needs to be done, especially the rift between tribes and the corporations.
There's a huge, you know, the way that tribes are funded and the money that comes in is so different, and it's really difficult. Things are controlled for the tribes. They can only spend their money on certain things. The Native corporations, they're a business, they're a private business, and they can do different things. So I think the disparity between the well-paying jobs at the Native corporations and the desire for there to be more jobs in the rural areas is going to be an issue.
And that continues.
And there are different responsibilities where the tribes have to look out for, you know, health, education, child welfare, roads, housing. They have that whole gamut of responsibilities, whereas the corporations are for-profit and pay dividends. So the level of funding and the level of responsibility for both of them are really different.
Well, the theme for this year's AFN is reflect, refresh, and renew, and you will be providing gavel-to-gavel coverage on the radio for AFN. What do you think about that theme?
Well, I think it's completely appropriate. I mean, AFN has had a profound, an incredibly important role in the state, getting the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and then working on other pieces of legislation that have literally shaped the state and made it what it is today. And they did that through incredible unity. It was not easy, but we still have fights ahead, you know, over land and subsistence and self-governance. And that kind of unity is needed for the future, and I think that's where AFN has an important role to play.
Well, we have just about a minute left, but maybe, Nellie, you could tell us about the importance of the event that leads up to AFN, the Elders and Youth Conference.
They have adopted a very tough theme, ancestral imperatives, and they're going to talk about all of these issues and many that we haven't mentioned that are huge, big, and are going to need to be addressed by these young people in the coming 50 years.
Well, the next 100 years, who knows? Just very quickly, can you tell us what the next chapter is for AFN, you think?
Well, adding to what you said about elders and youth, I was so proud of Megan. I thought that she was so well spoken, and she brought up such important issues. There she is. And she brought up such important issues, and those are the kinds of issues that we have to face in the future.
All right, well, we want to thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights. Well, the Alaska Federation of Natives Convention means many things to many people.
That I'll be sewing until the night before we leave.
To Donna Polium, the customary art show is her passion. She spends the entire year making beaded gloves and other pieces of art to sell at AFN. Some of her work takes even more time, like this beautiful baby holder, which took her 3 years to make. Donna says every bead she sews is a labor of love.
I'm going to be sad to see it go because I almost have a bond with this thing, you know.
Donna says that she's also bonded with her granddaughter, who now fashions ice worms out of fur to sell at AFN, and last year sold enough to buy a trampoline. The art show, she says, very much reflects the heart and soul of AFN, a mosaic of so many colors, so many talents, and so many cultures. And before we leave you, some words of thanks to those who shared footage and photographs with us, the Alaska Federation of Natives, the Tuzi Consortium Library, and the Yup'ik Native Corporation, the Alaska Moving Image Preservation Association, the Alaska Film Archives, and the Anchorage Museum. We want to thank you for joining us as we looked at a movement now woven into the fabric of our state. See you next week.